How do we remain faithful disciples of Jesus? And through all the hardship and the trauma that's going to happen to us, and the disappointments and the joys, the key thing we need to know is the love of God, the love that God has for us, the love that he has for others, and who he is, and then develop that relationship with him, because that will keep us in there.
Welcome to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast, where we help you experience and bring renewal to your mission field. Join us and receive free resources at innovativechurchleaders.org. On today's episode of the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast, we're honored to have with us Dr. Lucy Peppiatt. How are you doing, Lucy?
Very well, Eric. Thank you.
Well, you're the president of the Westminster Theological Center. You've written several books there in Bristol in the UK. I would love for you just to describe what has been challenging and what has been liberating about ministry in a more of a post-Christian context.
Yes, I would say that the challenge, well, it's interesting because I find that my generation in the UK are the generation that actually have been quite really resistant to the gospel. And so I have many friends, school friends and university friends, who just wouldn't call themselves Christian, and they're lovely people, but they have made the decision, and also parents of our kids that I've met through our school days, but they are just not Christian. And it's unusual for me to be a Christian, often with people of my own age group. And so I would say that some of the challenges have been related actually to people in their late 50s and 60s, that they're genuinely not very interested. And so you have to just sort of navigate that, and you navigate that as part of your friendship, that you're a Christian, they're not, and you just sort of sort it out between you. But so that I think is quite challenging, and that there are certain kind of assumptions, again, among particular age groups in the UK about faith and the Christian faith. But then as you go down the generations for younger people now, so some of the more liberating things that I think we're all feeling now is that younger people are very, very much more open to talking about faith, to talking about spiritual things. And they're interested if you say, that you lead a church. So we used to find, my husband was a vicar. He was an Anglican vicar, and people would say, "Oh, what do you do?" And he'd say, "Oh, I'm an Anglican clergyman." And that would be like a total conversation killer. That would be the end of the conversation, basically. And I used to think, please, can we just say, so do we do something else? But now people are interested. They're like, "Oh, cool. What does that mean?
Tell
What do
me
you do?"
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a theologian. They're like, "Cool. What do you do and what do you write about?" and all those things. So there's been a big shift for us actually in the last kind of very recently, I'd say about 3 to 5 years.
It is very interesting, and I think it's hard not to wonder because it's unfamiliar. And there is a spiritual search going on among the younger generation, and perhaps, Christianity is one of those options they're looking at. I would love to hear, as you are training up next generation of pastors, what are you trying to make sure every student at WTC understands or knows how to do before they graduate in order to be effective in this current mission field?
Well, first, just to say about WTC, we actually educate people from all walks of life and all ages. And most people are coming to WTC to kind of study alongside their full-time job or full-time kind of life pursuit. And so we're not only training people for church leadership, although we do that as well. So we have a very, very sort of diverse student body who are doing theology for different reasons. But also in our church setting, my husband and I, for 21 years, well, actually for longer, we have really worked with young people in their 20s and 30s and love discipling them. And I would say very much in our church setting, we're kind of training people for leadership. So it's a great question to be thinking, what is it you really want them to know? And I would say this overlaps both in what Nick and I do in church, but also in my work at WTC. And I would say that one of the main things I go back to again and again is somebody's perspective of God. Who do they think God is? And how do they relate to him? Because so many of the things that go wrong in pastoral ministry are because people have a faulty or skewed, a distorted view of God. They don't understand, they haven't really absorbed in their hearts how much he loves them. They don't understand who they are as the beloved ones. They don't understand how much they are affirmed by him. And so, I would say that a lot of my own teaching as the person who teaches Christian doctrine, and up until now, I've actually just given over this module to someone else, but I was teaching theological foundations for spiritual formation. And so I included in that module almost I would try and include everything that I've thought about over the years of what would I really love people to have understood about the depths and the implications of the gospel for life, in order then to be able to be those who can train up others, who can stay in for the long haul. I think that's the thing with being a Christian is, if we're going to live till we're 90, or even if we're only going to live till we're 60 or whatever, how do we remain faithful disciples of Jesus through all those years, and through all the hardship and the trauma that's going to happen to us in those years, and the disappointments and the joys, so how do we live life as disciples of Jesus faithfully, and what do we need to know in order to do that? And I would say the key thing we need to know is the love of God, the love that God has for us, the love that he has for others, and who he is, and then develop that relationship with him, because that will keep us in there.
So well said. And, in many ways, I think my seminary experience was so much about the Great Commission,
Mhm.
certainly to a smaller degree, the Great Commandment. But what I love you describing is that great invitation, come to me, all who are weary, like this
Oh,
journey with Jesus, sharing the yoke with us. And certainly then living out the Great Commission and the Great Commandment.
exactly.
wtctheology.org.uk. I'd love to hear even some of the resources you might have for pastors and churches that they can jump in and be a part of even in this next year. Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited because we recently have filmed, well, we ran for a couple of years a Foundations in Theology course online, and we're still running that. So that runs on a Wednesday evening UK time, so GMT or BST, and that we have a good number of people on that. So it's kind of a live online course. And then we made a decision to film those sessions, that program, and then to just sell that to churches. So we have a Foundations course churches edition, which has all the same modules. So we have biblical introduction to the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. We have early church history module, and we have a Christian doctrine, and then we have a leadership module as well.
That's great.
That's really it's really great. I love the course. It's very well taught, it's well produced, and so we are selling it to churches. It costs £250 per person. There's some reading material that goes along with that, and then you just get the whole course and you can deliver it how you want in your group. And we've had a few churches take it and go through it already, and they're really enjoying it. So I'd love
That's
people to know
great.
about that.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well, we're going to be giving away a few free copies of a couple of your books for those who are already receiving the email newsletter, The Imago Dei, Rediscovering Scripture's Vision for Women. I would love for you just to talk a little bit about, you've written several books, but help us understand kind of your sense of calling. What is the message that God has given you to share with the church?
I like your questions, Eric. I think I was a reluctant PhD candidate in many ways in my fees. wasn't quite sure I understood why I was doing a PhD, because I felt very much like a church person, called to the church, not ordained in any denomination, but within the Anglican Church, which we were part of then. I was a lay minister, which mattered to me that I was a lay minister, but I wanted to be a good minister of the gospel. And so I thought, studying was part of that. And then as I studied my PhD, I realized that I was much more of an academic than I had initially realized, and that I actually loved writing. And so when I finished my PhD, I wrote The Disciple, which was a book that had kind of been forming in me for many years, based on what we did in our church, that Nick and I were really committed to hopefully discipling others in the faith. And then my academic work had kind of informed that. So it's not an academic book, but it definitely came out of my PhD, actually. And then after that, I did genuinely feel called to write about women in the Bible and in the church. It wasn't something I was particularly looking to do. I was slightly reluctant to do that as well. But it ended up being a great privilege to be able, as it was doing a PhD, to be able to write about women, for women and for men. I don't see the issue of women in the church, in the world, in the Bible is something that is just for women. I think it's very important that men engage with that topic as well. And I have 4 sons, and so I sort of feel I've spent most of my life around men and young men, and so I love them, and I love the way they think and sort of go about life. So I very much hope that I am writing for men and women, but that was a topic that intrigued me and fascinated me. So I wrote on that. I wrote 3 books on that from different perspectives. And then the last book I wrote, or the last book that's been published, is a kind of a textbook really on how the doctrine of the Imago Dei, humanity made in the image of God, has been perceived through the ages and in different ways. And that was a fascinating little book to write and gave me a lot of food for thought. So that's quite a short book.
Well, and I think it's such an important understanding. We too often, at least on this side of the pond, maybe it's not as good over there either, but there's this, us versus them,
Yeah.
people who disagree. There's just such misunderstanding of the value of every individual, that each of us is created in the image of God. I would love for you to maybe share with us, what are some other things from your vantage point as a theologian, someone who's training up others in your seminary, someone who's on the front lines in ministry and church? What do you think that some pastors, and maybe even we can just pick on Americans, we have a lot of Americans that listen to this. What are some things that you think we might sometimes miss about our mission, or get caught up in, that may be part of the enemy's schemes to slow us down or distract us at least?
Yeah, I do spend quite a bit of time in the US, and I feel quite connected to the US. I lived there as a teenager for 4 years, and my grandmother was American. So I do follow. I kind of follow things, your news and things like that. I think that what we see over here is the way that Christians have been politicized over in the US in really quite a radical way, that it feels from the outside, it feels that Christians have often made their primary identity their political affiliation rather than their commitment to Jesus Christ. And that for me feels really tragic, because if we make our primary identity that we are Christians, that we are followers of Jesus Christ, then whatever we disagree with will have to be subsumed under the agreement that we have between us, that we are followers of Jesus, we've given our lives to him, and we want to follow him together. We could even have prayer meetings together because we know we're all praying to Jesus. And it may be that we would have some prayers cutting across each other, we're praying this, oh no, we're praying this. But there should be enough of a shared agreement between us to hold us together. But if our primary identity is that we're affiliated to a political party or a political ideology, then there will only be divisiveness. And I think the sort of level of vitriol and division that we see over here is deeply troubling to us. And I hope very much it doesn't come to the UK. I would be scared of that happening. I can see a few little signs that there are people being drawn to that kind of expression of faith. And I hope it doesn't. I hope it does to us.
Well, and our prayer and hope is, pastors, church leaders are experiencing renewal and bringing renewal. And through that renewal, some of what's happening on the edges are less and less being promoted in the middle. I feel like there is a move of God that isn't in the news that could very well be what kind of right sizes the church being the church. I would love for you to share just one final thought, Lucy, on for the pastor or the church leader who's tired of the division, struggling with just how hard ministry can be. What are some encouraging words you'd have for us?
Well, I love the fact, Eric, that I don't think I've heard anyone say that, what you've said about the renewal, and that is sort of bringing this new way of being and seeing. And that's kind of where I would go, is to the work of the Spirit for all of us anyone who is tired, who is longing for something new, who is wanting to see something fresh of God in their lives. And my experience has been that comes through the work of the Spirit in our lives, and that just asking Him to fill us again, to renew in us a love for the Scriptures, a love for prayer and intercession, love for spending time in God's presence. I think those are the things that fill us up again, because what drains us is just constant doing things, maybe even good things, doing things for other people and fulfilling all our obligations at church and being there when people need us to be there. But actually, that time that we spend with God and with His Word and in His presence, and allowing His Spirit to just fill us and renew us and refresh us is so needed. And I would say do that, go on some retreats and learn. One of the things that has really kept me going in a lot of my life is actually studying theology. And just keeping my mind alive to God, and learning from great minds and great men and women of devotion and prayer who are able to talk about God in ways that surprise me and enlighten me and illuminate who He is. And that's kind of brings my worship alive again. And so I would encourage people to study in the right places. I think it can be amazingly life-giving.
I think that's a great, great set of advice. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us. Keep up your great work there in Bristol, and God bless.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for listening to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and share as we bring Spirit-led innovation, reach new people, and make disciples who make disciples. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletter at innovativechurchleaders.org for free resources and an opportunity to join a cohort with Dr. N.T. Wright.